The annual Economic Summit occupies a special place in our national economic dialogue and is at once a statement of the priority that we attach as a government to close collaboration between the government and the private sector. And at the same time, it's an opportunity for us all to engage in meaningful discussions on the national economy. Our policy of partnering with the private sector is also born out of common sense and reality. While the federal government, on its part, is determined to build a modern economy, its ability to do so is limited by its financial capacity. Its annual budgeted expenditure of 7 trillion naira is only a small part of what is really a multi-trillion naira economy. The private sector is clearly a bigger contributor to the economy, and it follows that the private sector must be enabled and encouraged to play its decisive role if our development efforts are to succeed. In the period since the last economic summit, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan was articulated and adopted. And this dynamic document, which was developed through extensive consultations with stakeholders, lays out our national economic priorities over the next 3 years with a short-term focus on getting the economy out of recession and placing it on a trajectory of sustained inclusive growth in the long term. Several issues were raised at last year's Economic Summit, and in keeping with our commitment to keep faith with the work of the summit, we've taken several significant steps. Last year, there were concerns about availability of foreign exchange and the rapidly deteriorating exchange rate. The situation has been turned around and stabilized. Foreign exchange reserves have risen to over 32 billion, and end users have increased access to foreign exchange, partly due to increased export earnings and remittances, as well as the introduction of a dedicated transparent window for investors and exporters, NIFEX. The results have been encouraging as the inflows of capital in the second quarter of 2017 have risen to about $1.8 billion, which of course is almost double the first quarter of this year at about $908 million. Third, another issue of great concern last year, which has been resolved, was the loss of a significant amount of oil production. At some stage last year, we were losing up to 1 million barrels of oil daily. But due to the engagements that we've had with the Niger Delta and the new vision for that region, production has been restored to nearly 2 million barrels per day, and with some figures even in excess of 2 million barrels a day. At the same time, the debt overhang preventing required additional investments in the oil sector have been addressed through the plan to pay off joint venture cash call arrears. There's renewed confidence in the sector, and we're already seeing significant investments. Fourth, for a variety of reasons, including shortage of gas, limitations in transmission capacity, and financing constraints, power supply was in the region of about 3,000 megahertz. We tackled these issues, and although there's still vastly inadequate power supply, we've moved up to 7,000 megahertz in generation terms. We are at the moment dealing with the constraints in distribution with two notable policy interventions. The NERC, or National Electricity Regulatory Commission, in August issued the eligible customer directives and will this month issue directives on independent metering. The eligible customer regime allows willing seller, willing buyer arrangements in the sale of power, while the independent metering directive allows independent entities from registered power distribution companies to sell and install meters and to customers and be paid directly as collections are made from metered customers. This will break the distribution gridlock, and there's good cause to believe that we will not just achieve our 10,000 megahertz projection envisaged in the ERGP, but also be able to deliver the 10,000 megahertz. Fifth, we undertook to begin the process of diversifying the economy, leading with the agricultural sector. agriculture has created a large number of jobs and is an important source of raw materials and means of generating foreign exchange. Our Anchor Borrowers program, launched by the President in 2015, has benefited up to 200,000 small-scale farmers and attracted investments of up to 43 billion naira from participating institutions. What is particularly encouraging is that we are moving steadily towards self-sufficiency in rice, in sorghum, and several other products, and scaling up at least in 8 other commodities and produce. And these, of course, are vital for food security and also for export. The Presidential Fertilizer Initiative has resuscitated 11 blending plants with a capacity of 2.1 million metric tons, with the products being sold to farmers at between 5,500 and 6,000 naira, without subsidy and far less than prevailing market prices. But the best news is the enthusiastic response of the private sector. Walcott opened its 120,000 metric tons parboiled rice plant in Kebbi in August. This is the largest parboiled plant in Africa. Indorama opened its 1.5 million metric ton fertilizer plant, while Dangote announced its investment in 1 million metric tons of rice mills. Sixth, this time last year, we were promised to take steps to revitalize the railway sector. The now concession narrow gauge railway will soon come into full operation and help redress the high cost of freight, especially of food items. I also had the distinct pleasure of kicking off the construction of the Lagos-Ibadan segment of the Lagos-Kano standard gauge rail line earlier this year. The seventh issue is a complaint made at the last year's Economic Summit about lack of consultation with the private sector. Although we refuted this then, but of course it no longer can be said to be the case. The Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council, which I chair, consisting as it does of leaders of the public and private sector, is an excellent example of government-business cooperation and is contributing through various recommendations to addressing the challenges facing the manufacturing sector. Moreover, we have now had several sessions of the Presidential Quarterly Business Forum, which enables an exchange of views between the federal government and the organized private sector. The last meeting, we had a very useful interaction between the private sector and heads of the regulatory agencies on how to improve the business environment. This leads me to the 8th point, which was raised last year, our efforts to improve the business environment. With the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, we introduced reforms under a 60-day national action plan focused on 8 areas that make it easier to register, that make it easier to do business. This includes registration of business, obtaining construction permits, and we've had to work with certain specific subnationals to achieve this. We're working with Kano, we're working with the Kano state government, with Lagos state government, and the Rivers state government. Trade across borders, facilitating the entry and exit of people and registration of property. Our visa on arrival process has proved to be quite effective, and we've got several testimonies on the visa on arrival process. These are some of the examples of what we've tried to do with the ease of doing business. But the second national action plan, which will bring about similar results, was launched at the beginning of this month. Ninth, the last year, most of our social programs were still framed around projections. This has changed. The Empower program for unemployed graduates has employed already 200,000 young people, with another 300,000 set to be recruited in this current phase. With regard to the homegrown school feeding, we're feeding close to 12 million children across 14 states that are participating in the program currently, with the numbers expected to ramp up as it begins to cover 21 states in this new academic session. The JEEP program, which gives credit to MSMEs, is also growing quite rapidly. The challenges and obstacles facing MSMEs is the 10th area in which we are striving to make progress, and some progress has been made since last year. We've addressed some of the regulatory and financial challenges facing this crucial sector, The national MSME clinics have been taking place across all the states in a systematic manner, and has helped several thousands of MSMEs to engage with regulators such as business and product registration issues, access to finance, export requirements, amongst others. In addition, an executive order promoting local content in government procurement has been issued, intended to give preference to Nigerian small businesses in specific sectors. One of the critical things that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has proposed to us in support of the local content initiative is that they've asked for what they describe as margins of preference for local content goods. In other words, what they're saying is that if you want to prefer local content goods, then you must take care of the requirement or the problem that local content goods have. In other words, that they're usually more expensive than imported goods. And so we have to take care of that by what they describe as margins of preference. So if a local content good is 35% more expensive than an imported good, we still will buy the local content goods. That's the sort of proposal that they are making. Now we're looking at that proposal, and we're looking at, especially at the percentage for procurement purposes. But we do agree with the principle that if we're going to promote local content goods, then we must find ways of preferring them to import. And we think that the margins of preference is a sensible way to do so. Now, these 10 issues which I've mentioned are not the complete picture of what has been done since last year, but they're rather an indication of the responses to the issues that we raised here last year and what government has done about those issues. And I want to say that the administration remains focused on implementing the ERGP, and our actions thus far are just the beginning of changes required to turn the economy around. The key thing is that issues of concern raised in this forum must be systematically addressed, and we're committed to doing so. And we want to continue to work with you on some of the other lingering concerns, because we think that this forum is important not just for throwing up the issues, but also for interrogating what actions government has taken to ensure that those issues have been addressed. We're for example, concerned, as most of us are, with interest rates and the very high interest rates. And of course, most of that has to do with government borrowing. On account of government borrowing, there are obviously problems around interest rates, and we intend to look at those issues very closely. The evidence, of course, points to crowding out of business, of private business, and we think that that is correct. The federal government is therefore trying to reduce the demand for domestic paper, and will seek to refinance maturing domestic debt with long tenor and cheaper external borrowing. Meanwhile, intervention funds will continue to be made available through the Bank of Industry and the repositioned Nexim and Bank of Agriculture and the newly established Development Bank of Nigeria. Going forward, the federal government will continue to sustain the dialogue with the private sector, and most notably through the National Economic Summit, but also through the Presidential Quarterly Business Forum and various sectoral bodies. We count on the continued engagement of the private sector to support the economic policies of this administration, and I certainly look forward with anticipation to receiving the outcomes of this 23rd National Economic Summit. And so it's now my pleasure to formally declare open the 23rd session of the National Economic Summit.